Hello everyone, I am CyberHex, and welcome to the first installment of a new series of mine, Your Rival's Handbook. I think that's what I was going to call it. I've come up with, I'm so bad at naming things. Your Rival's Handbook, that's what we're running with. And yeah, I have a lot of ideas for, trying to bring out more videos that are aiming to help new players get into Rivals, because there's, Rivals isn't that complicated of a game in the grand scheme of things, but there's still a lot to pick up on. So I want to be able to help new players parse all that information and just learn what they need to know. And for this first episode, I actually have a two-parter coming for you, and that is going to be about the stages in Rivals. Because yeah, this game has a pretty damn big stage list, so hopefully in these videos I'll help you sort of break down what you need to know about all the stages and how to counterpick a little bit better. So yeah, as you can see in Rivals, we have 15 legal stages to choose from. Yep, all of them are legal. There are like more for fun versions of the stages, but in the basic form, everything's legal. You can use them all. So I'm sure there's some game that has like a bigger one. I'm sure like Brawlhalla or whatever probably might have more stages, but I personally don't know of one that has more. So quite a few stages here, but as you can probably already tell, there is a bit of overlap, right? So something that I think will make it a little bit easier, especially as we go on, is that you'll definitely be able to draw some comparisons to stages. And a lot of it is just kind of picking out, like, which part of the stage is really going to be the most important for you in this situation, or, like, most important for you over your opponent. Just to kind of start things out here, I do want to show off the rule set, because I know some people, when they go to their first local, they do have a little bit of difficulty with that. It's pretty simple, though. The stage, or the, all tournaments offline are played in tourney mode. The game will show you what stages you have to start with. You got 5 starters: Merchant Port, Tower, Gates, Julesvalle, and Forest Floor. Pretty solid starter stage list. And then after game 1, all of the counter picks unlock offline. If you're doing best of 3, you get 4 bans. If you're doing best of 5, you get 3 bans. And if you're playing online, you always get 3 bans. In doubles, there's also 2 stages that are different, only in doubles. There's going to be Treetop Lodge and Forest Floor. I'm obviously not going to be like talking about these stages because doubles is not really played super seriously, but I do want to mention that, if you ever, go to play doubles, don't get jump scared by these stages. They are a lot bigger in TV2 games and whatnot. So keep that in mind. Anyway, yeah, this is going to be the stage list. Also, one other thing about stages that's pretty frivolous, but I still think is important to mention. As you can see, most stages in the game have skins. These skins act the same. They're all tournament legal. They're technically considered gentlemen's in the RCS rule set, but most people aren't going to ask you to like not play on these stages. They're pretty, they're pretty fine. So definitely keep that in mind. All function the same. That being said, a lot of the stage skins, I shouldn't say a lot, some of the stage skins may lag the game. So do keep that in mind, especially if you're like, don't have a very good computer. I think these two in particular, Frozen Gates and Julesvalle, are going to be the worst offenders. They can definitely slow down the game at times. So if you have trouble with that, do keep that in mind. Maybe don't pick them, even though in my opinion, almost every stage skin looks better than the normal one. I do also have 2 things that I want to sort of mention and /clarify before we jump into this. First of all, I want to shout out Classic Dinos and Eagle for both being huge helps in getting this video. Dinos was like the person I consulted when writing all of my notes. I don't have a script for this. I'm just reading off and ripping off bullet points essentially. And he helped me fact check all of those, so huge shout outs to him. And also to Eagle for being probably one of the best, sort of statisticians in the community in terms of just getting so much game data. He has multiple spreadsheets that I'll be linking down below in regards to stage sizes and stuff like that, and all of that I referenced in some of the stats you'll be seeing. I have the special overlay here, and I'll be showing relatively speaking blast zone heights or blast zone sizes. Hello, Hex from the future here. I just wanted to clarify that when it's a smaller number, that is going to be like a smaller blast zone or stage. I feel like you could definitely read it backwards. So if it's like 1 out of 15, it is going to be the smallest blast zone or smallest stage length as opposed to the largest blast zone or stage length. So just make sure you understand that. And also characters that are generally considered to be good on the stages, as well as potentially some that are considered to be bad if the stage has notably bad characters, but I won't be using that super often, hopefully. I'll try to be putting roughly 4, maybe 5 characters in each stage. Keep in mind, it won't literally be the 4 or 5 best characters. There are going to be some stages where I might cut out a really good character, because I want to make sure every character gets a couple stages, gets to show up a couple times. And if I just choose the literal best, you're going to be seeing a lot of the same characters, particularly Crag. In general, there are some characters that just straight up don't have a bad stage. So like Crag, Maple, or Kane, I think are all pretty prominent examples. Zetterburn to a degree doesn't really have a bad stage. I feel like Rana doesn't have a bad stage. There are some others you could definitely argue for. I know some people think Ori doesn't have a really bad stage. Crag is really the main offender, right? Kind of picking that character is just a nightmare. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that there may be a slight bit of character bias in the way I present these stages. I play Claren and Eliana in tournament. So my perspective of these two characters and what stages I like for them are definitely going to come into play, especially with Claren, the way she moves around platforms compared to other characters. You're definitely going to tell that I may put a little more emphasis on that than other creators would. So do keep that in mind. Obviously, I'm not going to be like biased against any character, but yeah, you might feel, especially with Claren, because I feel a lot more comfortable like counterpicking with her than with Eliana. Like I just feel like I know more about the character. And just this once, I'm going to be using the stage skin because I hate the way Merchant looks. I'm sorry, Merchant fans. It's a good stage layout, I'm not going to lie. Especially recently, I've really been warming up to Merchant Port as a stage. I think it's pretty fun, but god damn, it just looks so bad. Anyway, so probably the first thing you're going to notice about this stage is these funny little top platforms. And this is kind of the big thing, is that Rivals has probably the most unique plat movement of any plat fighter. It really is like the star of the show in this game. As you can see, you can plat drop while running, and not only can you do that, but you can carry that momentum into a jump. Now, the effectiveness of this varies from cast member to cast member. Claren gets a really good one, which is kind of the thing I mean when I say her plat movement, if I'm like biased towards that. You know, she can cover a lot of the stages, you can see, especially from up here. So for a character like her, she'll be using that to just zip around the stage. But even if your character doesn't have a good plat boost, if I didn't say that's what this is called, is plat boost, even if your character doesn't have a good plat boost, they probably have some pretty good plat drop aerials, which are extremely important in this game. When you plat drop, you know, it is instant. You can just go off the platform. So doing a plat drop aerial essentially allows you to, you know, not only quickly get a landing aerial, but also potentially get your aerial out earlier than someone who is jumping at you and doing an aerial because there's no jump spot there. You know, those extra 5 frames can make the difference sometimes. Not so much with a character like Claren, which has got like a lot of slow aerials where you gotta space around them smartly. But for a character like, say, Rano, or Zetter, or Crag, where they have those nairs that they can just land on you and turn into combos or kill confirms, that is really important, especially because those units are all like, you know, frame 4 or frame 5 or whatever. In those situations, yeah, those 5 frames are genuinely going to matter, so it is something to keep in mind there. Now, when it comes to these platforms, they're pretty interesting in that they're significantly closer to each other than most platforms are in this game, which means you can do stuff like this. You know, wave landing in Rivals is pretty easy, so if you just run off a platform and wave land like this, you can get a lot of potential. You just like bait out attacks, get tons of movement mix-ups, and the thing is, you don't have to just go to the other one. You know, you can wave land back onto a platform. Oops, which way am I going? Don't fuck up your movement. I'm sorry if I fuck up movement, I'm very bad at it, so just bear with me a little. But yeah, you can do stuff like that, right? So you can just hang out on these platforms, mix up your movement, play a little evasive, and then when the opponent seems to get a little overzealous, boom, you drop on them with something. Or even just like jump away. You know, jump away. Usually I feel like you're going to be a little better off jumping to the platform, but really just whatever is going to get you away from the opponent if you think that they've actually got your number in terms of trying to shuck you. So lots of stuff you can do on these platforms, tons of ways to plat drop. Plat boosting on these platforms is a little weird, but it's definitely something you can do. You know, cover a good amount of the stage just like that. I think that basically covers everything for the top platforms. They're definitely a little weird. They take some time to get used to. It took me a long time to really come to appreciate the stage. The big thing is that these are, I think, like the same height as most top platforms in this game, maybe slightly shorter. I forget, I'll put text on screen to clarify that. Can definitely be a little tricky to shark, right? And in general, holding top platforms in this game tends to be pretty strong. Obviously, with how much freedom you have on platforms, you know, moving on and off them, options for like plat boosting off of them, etc., etc. Trying to just like top plat camp people can be especially strong in certain matchups. So there's a lot of characters. Claren, Edelus, Palm, Shovel Knight are some of the more prominent examples where plat camping them is a big part of their counterplay at higher levels. You know, you can kind of stop them from doing a lot of their typical game plan by just hanging out on a platform. So you definitely want to keep in mind stages with these top platforms. Gonna be pretty strong. not always strictly against those characters, but are going to open up extra strategies for counterplay against them that you might not have on other stages like, say, Forest Floor, where you don't have high platforms, which I will be talking about the stage later, of course. I feel like it's definitely weird on this stage just because you have so much more room to move around between them. I don't see it super often. I actually feel like I see these platforms get used a lot more aggressively than other high platforms, but it can still happen, so definitely keep that in mind. As far as these lower platforms go, still quite a bit to talk about here. So this is definitely like the normal height for, you know, just platforms in this game. And what's nice about that is that there are a lot of moves in this game that can shark these platforms. You know, I showed Clarion Strong right there. Definitely check that out with your character, see what moves are going to be sharking on these normal platform heights. Because once you kind of figure that out, you can definitely like really mess people up, put a lot of pressure on them with how they land. I think that's especially important because with these platforms being so close to the edge, they also kind of open up possibilities for recovering. With there being no ledge in this game, obviously you always have to find a way to land, and when you have platforms near the edge like this, they become so much more important for recovery than in like almost any other game, probably actually any other game. Because now, you know, instead of just, say, having to waveland onto the stage as, like, you know, one of my options, I can waveland onto the stage, or I can waveland onto this platform. Now, some characters are going to be able to cover both at the same time, right? So, like, a Hodon Fair, for example, that's probably going to cover both. You know, Clarion Strong I showed that can, in theory, cover both. Lots of stuff will be able to cover both, but a lot of that stuff, you know, like Clarion Strong, for example, it's going to cover one very well and the other kind of poorly. So unless you're at like 200%, you can still get a lot of mileage out of it, even just like a tiny little mix-up like that, where, you know, I just go up here or I go up here. And a lot of characters, you know, even going down to this ground level, right, that opens up the possibility to triangle dash, so you can go through someone's thing, whereas up here, you can go higher and potentially dodge a lot of lower hitting attacks. And obviously, that is just one layer of the mix-up. You know, a lot of characters in this game have edge cancels, so you can edge cancel off of these, you know, you could edge cancel off of the edge of the stage, right? Like normal. It's a little hard to do that. Somehow got a first try with Clarion, I'm not that great at it. But when you have these platforms, it becomes so much safer, not just to land there, but to edge cancel in general. You get a lot more leeway. Now merchants don't go all the way off stage, or they're not as useful as, you know, some other stages, but compared to the other starters, it definitely ends up being a massive luxury in the grand scheme of things. You always have those platforms as a sort of plan B to go to. And for a lot of characters, like say Rano or Zetter, where they have ways they can edge cancel from really, or like Sov, I think is another good example, they can edge cancel from really high up, those platforms become so much more important. You see them used a ton. And as the person that's edge guarding them, you always have to keep in mind, you know, how am I going to put myself in a position to potentially cover both, or to like quickly react to which one they're trying to go to. These platforms tend not to get used as aggressively as they will on other stages because of them getting put on the corners. It's weird, because Merchant definitely feels long, but it's actually like the average stage length. As are the blast zones, right? Everything about this stage, like stats-wise, is super average, as you've probably seen at the bottom there. Of course, with those average stats means that basically any character is going to be fine here. The fire characters tend to be especially strong on this stage, but really doesn't matter who you pick, right? Like, they're going to be good on Merchant one way or another. You know, you can use these top flats for the plat drop mix-ups. You have the platforms to aid in recovery over here. It's long enough that characters who want bigger stages still have space to, like, back off. But not so big that if you're trying to play a more scrappy character or more scrappy playstyle, it's really not that hard to cover the gap a lot of the time. Just a nice mix of both worlds. I definitely recommend getting used to Merchant because, honestly, this stage is, like, definitely encapsulates a lot of what makes Rivals so cool and so unique compared to other flat fighters. So if you can kind of understand Rivals as a whole, you'll definitely be able to figure out and enjoy the stage, you know, in one form or another. Alright, I had a lot to ramble about when it came to Merchant, but hopefully this one will be a little bit quicker. This is Tower of Heaven, the game's standard tri-plat. Yeah, I think from the get-go it should be fairly easy to kind of figure out what the gist of the stage is, right? The platforms are like the normal height, so this is like normal low platform height, this is normal high platform height. This is where you're going to be seeing kind of more standard platforms when it comes to recovery, so they are definitely close enough to the stage to take advantage of if you're not like bad at the game like I am. Good enough to definitely recover there in some situations, but you have to be pretty picky about when you go there. You're not going to be able to do it all the time. and it's a bit more of a commitment to get to them. I'd say most stages do function like this in some form or another. It's definitely going to be seen a lot less often as we get to like the counterpick stages, but when it comes to the starters, there's usually at least some situations where you can get to the platform sometimes, but not all the time. If your character has a better recovery, then odds are they're going to be able to do it a little more often, but it really just depends on character to character. You know, every character is pretty different in that regard. Recoveries and rivals get pretty off the wall. So yeah, like overall, the stage is a pretty average length. It is just slightly shorter than Merchant, so you're going to be able to cover it all a lot quicker, and especially with the platforms being closer to the center of the stage. It is very easy for basically the entire cast to use these platforms and then like go down and cover center stage, or just kind of find ways to retreat if they need be. And in general, platforms do end up being extremely important on the stage in general. Not only, you know, for these movement and recovery aspects, and even like the defensive one, you know, this top platform can be really nice defensively for a lot of characters. Once they sort of manage to take a lead, have a little more freedom, because they can really easily go to like either one of these platforms right here. Or even just go like super high up and use that, you know, before dropping down. Like they have tons of ways to kind of be slippery on these platforms. But for a few characters who have really good ladder combos, they can also just shred stocks on the stage. This is especially true for, I'd say, like Zedder and Crag are the two scariest characters in that regard, but they're definitely not the only one. I mean, you have like Olympia as well. Like in some situations, Forest can be super scary about that. Yeah, like, and even like ones that don't really need platforms, like Graster and Ileana. I mean, those platforms don't hurt, right? They can still offer new ways to let them refresh their resources or like keep their resources from burning out too quickly. Can make, you know, even characters that can juggle anywhere just be that much stronger with it. Juggle combos in general go absolutely insane here. There's so many clips of, you know, especially like Crag or whatever, just like up air, you know, what do you do? You can't do anything in some situations, and these platforms enable them to follow all DI and just make that like essentially true if your reactions are on point. You know, some of those combos are going to become extremely dangerous, and if your opponent's kind of hitting you with a lot of those, you might want to second guess going back here. That being said, of course, again, just like Merchant, every character's kind of got something they can do on this stage. Even the two characters that I generally think are kind of mid here, not even like bad. Like I'm not putting them in that list, of course, but these are just my opinions. I think Sov and Ellie are not great on this stage, but like they're not bad, and that's obviously just a me thing, because I see plenty of Sylves and plenty of Ellies play on the stage to great success. I just think for their more zonery archetypes, it can feel a little cramped, but with how good movement is in Rivals, you know, even some of the more zony characters like Absa, probably one of the closest characters to being a zoner in the whole game, and she loves this stage because her Epi lets her zip around and do crazy things with the platforms. And you see that a lot with other characters who rely on platform movement, like Sapors and Rano. Those are probably the two, you know, first characters most people will think of when they think about platform movement, because those characters really rely on having good flat drop aerials and having plat movement that kind of like makes up, especially for Rano, you know, he moves a lot on plats to make up for his bad airspeed. So a stage like this is going to let him be hyper mobile, and you're definitely going to be wanting to get used to it if you play a character like those. So like Forz, Rano, Zedder for like more platform movement heavy play. But of course, for other characters like Crag, as I mentioned, you know, ladder combos go crazy, Absa too to a degree. Characters with a good plat boost like Ori and Claren are going to love the stage for the platform ability they get, like across the stage. Not so much, you know, maybe not always up to this platform necessarily, but they can still do stuff like that. You know, being able to zip between these two platforms gives them a ton of extra options. Basically any character in the game, if you can, you know, if you can think about them, you can think of something they have on the stage. Even the two I mentioned, you know, Sylve and Eliana both have really good ladder combos here. It can enhance their combo game if you just play to the stage's strengths. So yeah, overall, I think for the most part, this is a stage that's pretty hard to justify banning most of the time. Definitely some situations where if your opponent's just straight up mixing you with those ladder combos or like crazy good plat movement, I can sort of get it for sure. And again, if you're playing to those strengths, particularly the plat movement, this is absolutely a stage worth picking. Basically everyone loves it. Probably one of the most popular stages in the whole game if I had to guess, and with very good reason. It's honestly a really fun stage once you get the hang of the game's movement. Alright, so next up we have definitely one of the most interesting starter stages, probably the most unique one to Rivals, and that's going to be Aethereal Gates. So as you can see, the big thing with this stage is it has moving platforms. Now for some reason, this game has two stages with moving platforms, and both of them are starters, which I find very odd, but you know, that's just how it is. Now, this is kind of an interesting stage because in terms of like the length, right, it's actually the same length as tower, so it's really not that big. But then you look at the blast zones, as I'm sure you're seeing right now, and yeah, those are some big blast zones. Not only that, but, you know, the platforms that are in this form are pretty spread out, which kind of makes the stage feel a little larger. And not only that, but as you can see, the platforms are also higher than normal, so this is a completely unique plat height. Only this stage has them. So for a lot of characters, they're going to lose their go-to sharking option. Now, they may still have an alternative, like, for example, Claren. You know, if I can hit you with up tilt, it's always going to tipper. That's only the case on this stage, and this stage specifically, and it's really funny. Other characters, like Sylve, for example, right, their up tilt is going to work just like normal. You know, and I know Sylve is an example, but there are lots of others, like Absa, Raster, things that are in, like, they can all hit the normal plat height, but they cannot hit these platforms. So you gotta keep that in mind, right? The way you shark on this stage is gonna tend to be a lot different. You usually have to use some kind of short hop aerial, maybe like a nair or something. Very important to keep in mind, because you don't just want to be like swinging at the air like an idiot. We all do it from time to time, but you know, just mitigate that as best you can. Interestingly, of course, the bottom blast zones are pretty small, so if your character has like a pretty reliable way to kill with a spike, which I'm not really getting to showcase here, but like it's, you know, it's gonna kill pretty early on the stage, like really early. Which is kind of interesting, because actually most of the heavies in this game do die earlier to spikes than they will to vertical kill moves, because of the way this game's weight works. Eliana is like the only exception there. And I do think that's important to note, because with the other blasters being so big, heavies tend to really like the stage. I think across the board, all of them do like the stage, because they can just live forever. Basically all of them can. So if you're fighting against a character like, say, Crag or Hodon, you may want to be, not like fishing for spikes, but if you have an opportunity, know that that opportunity is going to be huge. That's kind of like the main class of characters that I usually think of when I think of Gates, but just like with Tower, and maybe even to a slightly more extreme degree, you definitely see some of the really plat drop heavy characters like this stage, and that is because of this platform layout. This will get shown again later in the counterpick video, but when the platforms are just together like this, it makes plat dropping so much scarier. You have a lot of room to bait out potential anti-airs, and then just drop and, you know, drop on them. So Force in particular, I know I've heard some people say this is like Force's best stage, and I honestly believe it. It's really good for him, pretty good for Rano as well, and then pretty good for heavies. Those are generally like the types of characters you're going to be seeing picking Gates. So yeah, as you can see, the platforms, they move every 20 seconds. So on this normal version of the stage, they move when the eyes blink, and on the Frozen Gates version, the other one, they shake before they move. Definitely important to keep in mind, because as you can see, it's very hard to recover to these platforms, but once they move to the middle, thought they would do it sooner, there you go. It is actually pretty easy to get to them when they're like this. The extra height does make it a little clunky. It's not going to work all the time, but in this format, you're generally going to get a little bit better recovery. Ground and neutral is going to be a bit stronger on this form. Going to be able to get more use out of stuff like plat boosts. And then on this form, I feel like advantage can often be a lot scarier here. It's kind of easier to have like nowhere good to DI to if you get hit in like the middle of the stage. Lots of potential for crazy tech chases on the platform. Like I said earlier, plat drops. And if the opponent gets thrown off stage and the platforms are like this, and suddenly you have way less ways to actually make it to the stage in the first place. So that's generally how I look at the two forms. Obviously with the stage alternating pretty consistently. Neither one ends up really being too polarizing. It really just depends on like what character you're playing. Again, no one really bad here, but I do think there's a lot of characters, like say Claren for example, that are just kind of mediocre on this stage. You know, it's definitely not bad, but it doesn't do anything special for them. It just kind of exists. You know, you can maybe live a little longer as long as you're comfortable with your kill confirms killing later, because a lot of them will. Alright, so next up on the chopping block is my favorite stage in the whole game. Already covering it this early into the duology. It's very unfortunate. You know, this is a stage that I think might actually look a little small at a glance. It is not. It is the biggest of all the starter stages. So this kind of movement, still going to cover a lot of the stage, but it's not going to cover like all the way to the very end like it can on some of the other starters. Alright, so when most people think about Forest Flare, the first thing they're going to think of is going to be the crazy small top blast zone this stage has. It is the second smallest in the game. So if you like killing off the top, if that's what you're really getting in the set and the opponent's not really doing that quite as much, then already that does give you one thing to think about with this stage. Even just in general, though, I think, you know, with that blast zone being so small, with the plat layout being just very normal, a good amount of people will have this as a comfort stage. I certainly know I do. Again, like I said, favorite stage in the game. I go here a lot of the time just because I don't know what to go to. I'm just going to pick my favorite, which, you know, you do want to have some caution when you do that, especially if your favorite stages are like a riskier one, like Aramata. I'll talk about that a little bit later. As long as you exercise a little bit of caution, though, honestly, just picking your favorite isn't that bad. You know, as long as they're good on the stage, right? If you can make it work, that's what's most important. But yeah, that top blast zone is like always going to be a threat, because to be honest, basically every character has some like very goofy ways to kill off the top. Ori, I think, might be like the only exception. They have strong can kill really early. It's just, you know, it's not like as easy to pull off. They usually got to do like sign pop up strong kind of stuff, or make like a crazy hard read. So you maybe see, you know, this vertical kills a little less from Ori, but aside from them, like basically every character's got a handful of pretty solid kill confirms off the top, or just good ways to carry you off the top. Now you won't see ladders on the stage quite as much on other ones, but because of the top blast zone being so small, it's not that weird for someone to only need like 2 up airs, for example, to kill, right? Like once you get to around like 100%, you know, Aether can just up air you once, land on that platform, up air you a second time, and not just galaxies if he's on point with his sweet spots. And of course, if you happen to be like a heavy or a big body character, you know, you might not really go far enough to escape like a, you know, a third up air right near that blast zone, and then you're dying at even lower percents. So killing off the top is going to be super brutal on the stage a lot of the time. Which I think is probably one of the main reasons to pick it. But with the stage being so wide, it also kind of gets into the importance of playing grounded neutral, and I kind of hinted at this with Aethereal Gates, but I think it's a lot more relevant to talk about it here. With there being no way to plat drop here in the middle of the stage, it can be a lot safer to play grounded, because there's not as many ways to move around platforms to mix you up. There's certainly ways to move around them, but they're a little bit more limited compared to other stages. And in particular, with there not ever being like a super high platform that's going to be hard for characters to shark, you don't really have to worry about like plat camping as much. So this is definitely, I think, another really good reason to pick the stage. If you're worried about getting plat camped, I definitely recommend working on, you know, playing the stage again, as long as you're comfortable with the risk of like early top blast zone kills, and potentially getting outplayed on the ground. I mentioned earlier Sylvanas and Daedalus. Those are kind of the 2 big characters when it comes to ground neutral and rivals. They definitely excel at that. And surprise, surprise, you know, you're going to see those 2 characters picking the stage quite often. So they're definitely the 2 that I think are going to be most careful about picking Forest Floor against. I personally think Clarion's really strong here. Honestly, like most of the 5 characters I think are pretty strong here. So in general, I don't think anyone's really bad on this stage. Again, Sylvan and Edda, I think, are the 2 real standouts when it comes to Forest Floor. Otherwise, though, honestly, like I don't think there's too much to add. I mean, the bottom blast zone is also pretty small, which I didn't mention for Gates, but it is important to keep in mind that while bottom blast zone is certainly a thing, there's usually more ways you can like DI kills the stuff that would kill you off the bottom. There's a few characters like Maple and Clarion where your options are a little more likely to be kind of limited, but for the most part, it's not like the biggest deal. There's only a handful of characters that really like consistently look for bottom blast zone kills. And last but certainly not least, we have Julesvalle. Of course, any Smash 4 players are going to instantly, you know, get warm, comfy flashbacks to everyone's favorite Smash 4 stage. And yeah, I mean, that's essentially, you know, what Julesvalle is. Definitely got a little bit more going on. You know, the platform on the stage does move pretty often. So basically, that starts in the center. First 5 seconds of the match, it is in the center, and then it moves left. And then it'll stay on the side of the stage for 10 seconds, move for 10 seconds, and it just repeats that cycle. You also have this top platform up here that first appears at the 30-second mark, and then it will take 10 seconds to move across the stage and then be off for 20. So yeah, not super important to remember the specific numbers a lot of the time. I think it's a little bit easier for this platform. The main thing is that these platforms do end up playing a pretty important role in recovery. This is the first stage we've seen so far where you might actually not have a platform to recover to, right? You can see in this situation right now, I got nothing. I gotta just make it back on my own. And that is not great for a good amount of the cast. Again, like I mentioned on Merchant, I mean, platforms can really aid in recovery for basically every character. So sometimes you have this super far overhanging plat, which is like the first time we've actually seen a truly overhanging plat. And you can do a lot of really sneaky stuff like that right there, you know, just barely waveland on and then even run back off stage and like bait your opponent into doing something, giving yourself a chance. But other times it is going to be going away. Probably more than half the time it might not be there to help you. So you gotta just recover on your own. That can make edge guards just happen. Maybe not necessarily more often, but it'll make them go on for so much longer. You'll take a ton more damage, and generally just have a much harder time, you know, living. Always a risk you have to take with Julesvalle is just that potential to get edge guarded. Now if you're not getting edge guarded super hard by your opponent, that definitely makes the stage a lot safer of a pick, or if you're just extremely confident in your recovery, then it might not be as big of a deal, but it's always going to be something to think about, because the edge guards on the stage can get really brutal. Not as bad as some other stages we'll be talking about in the counterpick video, but again, this is like the first taste you get of what it's like to recover in this game without platforms to help you. This top platform can also be pretty helpful for recovery, but as you see right there, it's not on screen for very long, so if you mess up, you might get baited by it. It is very important to keep in mind like how far it is. The clock can always help you. Just taking a quick glance at the clock, seeing how close it is to hitting, like, you know, the 0 in the last digit. That can really save your skin sometimes, especially for a character like Clarion, where she might have otherwise fairly limited options. You know, recovering up to that platform does give her an extra way to be sneaky with her uppy, and make it a little bit harder for the opponent to punish. Now, the other sort of facet of you know, the platform moving and not always having that platform available for recovery, you're also not always going to have it available for neutral. Now, sometimes it'll be like this, you're going to be chilling in the corner, you got your platform, the opponent doesn't have one. But I honestly, like, when I play on the stage, a lot of the time, my first thing that I'll do is just jump on this platform and, like, snag it and just try to play on it, you know? And if it doesn't work out right away, then obviously, yeah, I'll, like, back off, but I do my best to just, like, grab this position, because being on a platform in Rivals tends to be pretty strong. And not having one to deal with, like Forest Floor, or not having one to, like, take advantage of, rather, like I said on Forest Floor, can make neutral a lot stronger for certain characters, and even just certain players who are really good playing on the ground. So Sylvan and Aethereal are always going to be the kings of ground in neutral. The stage is very strong for them, so you have to make sure you're willing to, like, face them head on the ground. Now that being said, especially against the Aethereal, I do think there's some crazy things you can do to him on the stage with his recovery being kind of bad. Like, I'll take him here as Eliana, but not really as Clarion. So yeah, again, when it comes to ground and neutral, I guess I actually didn't dive into the real gameplay of it too much. Without having the ability to, like, plat drop or use platforms for move mix-ups, you often have to be a lot more straightforward. So aerials tend to become a lot weaker, because there's essentially less ways to kind of feign them. You can use, you know, stuff with, like, empty landings. Empty landings in general do tend to be pretty important in this game for baiting out parry. But you always have to be careful of getting with punished just throwing at aerials. Without having platforms, your arc is always going to be a lot more easy to predict. Now, for a character like Clarion, of course, if you have these big moves you can throw out on the ground, to do your best to stay safe, those are always going to be super helpful. You know, some characters like Meeple and Raster have ridiculously good ground speed, at least, you know, situationally in Raster's case. But that situation can be true essentially all the time, as long as you're, like, on point with the character. So they're going to be able to use their crazy good with punishing. Like, the fact that they have kind of limited options is going to matter a ton when your options are just that much better than your opponent's. So stuff like that is always going to be important to keep in mind. For a character like Forest, for example, that's going to be pretty bad, you know, not having platforms to not only give him extra mix-ups in his recovery, which can occasionally be a little bit limited, and also just being forced to stay on the ground and not being able to, like, use platforms to mix up his movement even more than he normally wants to. It's going to be not great for the character. I do think he's, like, pretty mediocre on the stage. Meanwhile, characters like Aethereal, Sylvanas, and the air characters, I think, all tend to excel here. Most of the air characters, I mentioned Raster being really fast on the ground, and then most of the other ones have some kind of zoning option that can allow them to play a little bit safer on the ground than other characters might have to. With that, combined with generally being able to get crazy good, like, vertical kills and just kills in general without needing any platforms to assist them, can make this stage pretty scary for a lot of them. I think especially Eliana is, like, really good here, and Apsa. Air characters also tend to have good recovery, so they're not as scared of not having a platform to recover to. I think those are generally some of the strongest characters on the stage. It is also the shortest starter stage, so do keep that in mind. While you can potentially have to deal with some pretty obnoxious, like, defensive play on the ground, it's at least easy to stay close to the opponent because of that shorter length. That's generally what you'll be seeing with the shorter stages. What that also means, though, is that when the stage is shorter, you're more likely to get thrown off stage. Blast zones are all pretty average, not really much to talk about there. And I think that basically covers everything with the stages. You know, it's a pretty good stage for a lot of characters, but you have to make sure that your situational awareness is really on point. So you can pretty easily get yourself like screwed over by going into disadvantage at the wrong time when the platform is there to either not help you or just help your opponent. Alright, and with all of that said, I think that basically covers part 1. So that goes over all of the starter stage in Rivals of Aether. In part 2, coming out hopefully very soon, I will be talking about the counterpick stages. So we got 10 of those to go through. I am super excited. If you have any questions, of course, don't be afraid to throw them down in the comments, or even contact me on Discord at cyberhex1434. I'm always down to answer questions about the game. If you have suggestions for future things you want me to talk about, you know, future Rivals guides, definitely do not be afraid to leave those down in the comments as well. You know, some characters are going to be outside of what I can really learn and teach, but, you know, I want to do what I can to help you guys. So if you have things you want me to talk about, again, don't be afraid. I really want to do my best to help the community with the series. So yeah, if you all enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe for future content. I have a lot of ideas in the works, and I'm really excited to share with everyone. With all that said, goodbye for today.